out of the several materials, there might be one or two that is striking and interesting to you, that is exciting, which you may want to have a conversation around. And so what I would do is to generally do a recap of what we did last week, and I shall open the floor for us to have a conversation on your reading so far based on the materials I share with you. You can do cherry picking based on any of the materials you find exciting. And I believe we all will find it also exciting to have a conversation around it. In that stead, when you pick any material you want to discuss with us, then you become the chief discussant. Then all of us will join in and share our thoughts and to reflect on that. Anyway, that is my style. The idea is that when we do that, we are able to share much knowledge and then bring it home. And we are able to appreciate what we can do even in contemporary times. I refer to myself as an applied historian. My central argument is that what is the essence of history if it does not throw light on the present and the future? So exactly the case, what we seek to do with this colonialism discussions. The past week, we looked at the outward imperial forms of expansion, the fact that it was led by the Europeans in two principal forms. The first was in the 17th century, which has been referred to in the literature I've shared with you, especially the one which is inaugural lecture presented by Eke, as the classic form of colonization. So that we see that Europeans gained excess or surplus by colonizing other territories. But however, there are social and economic crises which also triggered some of these things. Countries in Europe wanted to attach themselves with other territories and settle in those lands, especially here around the 17th century. We find their interest forcefully being directed towards the Americas and Australia. Then the second began in the 19th century. In fact, if you look at Eke's presentation, is of the view that there should not be what you call it, a kind of strict periodization when you look at the question about colonialism and efforts to colonize and all that, and even post-colonialism. In many respects, we will have a conversation around that over time, why it is difficult to even try to put a cap within some period. So you realize that the second began in the earlier decades of the 19th century. Then we have European expansionist activities, which in fact vehemently sought to colonize African and Asian territories within the 19th and the 20th centuries. So fundamentally, the European expansionist agenda in the 19th and 20th century sought in many ways to get raw materials from the local populations that were ruled or colonized, and also to accumulate bullion or profit. The other interesting thing is that the colonization of Africa in many parts of Asia and of the Indian subcontinent before this was also intended to create new economic structures that Kenneth talked about that the last time. The kind of capitalist machinery, the owners of capital dictating production and also directing profit motives and exploitation. So that becomes part of the became part of the central thesis of our discussions where we met the last time. So when we want to focus on Africa, then we also look at the 19th century with all the other consequences which has evolved even up to the present times. So, I mean, Ecke, for example, argues that there are three distinct aspects of the social realities in areas that experienced European conquest and rule in Africa and Asia, especially in the 19th and 20th century. The first element of colonialism has been interpreted or conceived to be activities of European colonization. Secondly, colonization has also been used to denote the reactions of those who were subjected to European conquest and rule to colonization. So there are two major streams of thought that really come up here. The agenda and the intentions of those who wanted to colonize and rule, that is the rulers, and the reactions or responses that culminated or emanated or came out from the control that the colonizers would have over the local population who were subjected to European dictates and dominance. So last week we had the opportunity to reflect also on the
Okay, it looks like we have a connection problem. Yes, Prof, you were aware that you were disconnected? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Sorry, the internet is just messing me up here, but sorry about that. I don't know why this season has been like that. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So grateful to be back. I got to Amy Caesar and I made reference to Satata's position on the, if you like, the motives of the colonizers and her thoughts and sentiments, as also shared by others, reflect what Aimé Césaire argued that the motives of the colonizers were, quote, you find in the material I gave you, neither evangelization nor a philanthropic enterprise nor a desire to push back the frontiers of ignorance and tyranny, nor a project undertaken for the greater glory of God, or an attempt to extend the rule of law, end of quote. So at least we understand that some of the suggestions as put out by the literature, purely Eurocentric literature, that seem to sometimes point toward some good deeds and praise. It's not necessarily the actual motive or reason why such steps were taken. Rather, the motives were self-serving, and it was not inspired by God, for those of you who are religious. So, as argued by Césaire, which many of you shared the last time, greed, and here they are, or here he adds, and liquor were the real motive of the colonizers. And the vast expanse of disregard for the colonized seemed to be aptly or appropriately or better captured by these two words, greed and liquor. So there are two important themes I think questions you need to write down to discuss colonization and reactions to colonization or responses to colonization in Africa. Closely linked to that discussion is the multifacetedness realism of colonialism in Africa. That when we look at the subject in Africa, it has many faces, either how respective colonizers managed to enter specific territories in Africa, the strategies they deployed to colonize, the impact of colonization, and the kind or type of responses which came about due to that. I said earlier that it's difficult to rather try to pin colonialism to dates in a respective sense. But the marking of the Berlin Conference, at which Africa was, if you like, partitioned, for example, it's very crucial. That led to the question about effective occupation of the African territories, to make good of appropriately taking over the territories of Africa. That which was done with the use of a piece of paper, getting into the territories, sovereign territories that had traditional leadership and forcefully taking over through the use of munitions and sophisticated armory as against the arms and the strength of the local population, even though they tried to resist, but the use of the cannon fire, among other rifles, gave them a comparative advantage. But in many respects, when they have taken some of these territories through trade, intrigues, religion, and all that, they effectively dominated these areas through colonial legislations and policies that sought to take over lands, landed property, and also to administer the territories and dictate matters in relation to their health and well-being, including their social, economic, political well-being of those states. So some have argued that colonialism cannot be terminated abruptly in one day or 1 year, as Eke argued, and we had some conversation. Then also what came up was a question about the post-independent social structure of Africa having been influenced by a supranational or an overarching colonial agenda, philosophy, or thinking or persuasion, which subtly trickled down into the social fabric of those societies the colonizers colonized. And so they had a certain kind of control, not only over the podcast structure, but the extent of their impact and influence was able to trickle into the existing societies, just as major events like the French Revolution, the industrialization, enlightenment, as social and philosophical construct will seep into the European society and systematically and gradually impact the other part, the world. Colonialism as a concept and as a practice with its concomitant impact, or if you like, additives, would also seep into both the colonial structure of society and the post-colonial social structure of society. And therefore, it would be difficult to deal with that question within a day or a year, especially within the post-independent structure. So the superimposition and the building of new knowledge, which was Eurocentric, subsisted. And therefore, post-independence, it was also going to be difficult to undo such well-entrenched European forms of education and knowledge and socialization with a rekindling of the new African ideals and philosophies, and also a rebirth or a certain Africa intellectual or philosophical or social, religious, cultural epiphany or enlightenment, which would have sought to also push indigenous knowledge systems now from the sidelines or periphery to the center, which would be able to dictate or direct the scheme of things going forward. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, in the case of the Gold Coast, tried to have a sweet interplay of the existing colonial podcast structure and also to introduce indigenous knowledge systems. And one of such arrangements, it would be seen in the area of healthcare. On this note, I would want to share a link with you. Have you been able to read all my articles, the ones I gave you? My personal articles, not the other ones of colonialism, which we are going to discuss. My personal articles for your own reflections. How many of you were able to read my personal article? None of you found it. I know you are busy. I understand. You find time and read some of my articles. I mean, they are easy to read, so you can read them at your leisure. I know you are busy, but you can read them at your leisure. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof. I was wondering, I remember one article from you that you shared a link with us. Was that an article that will also introduce us to other articles that you wrote?
I did not get what you said. If you can repeat, please.
So we did receive, I remember that we received at least one link from you to one of your articles.
Yeah, so I sent 2 links. One is on ship technology, slavery, repatriation, and air transportation, continuity and change. That is a link I sent. The other link was on what's the title? That's one of the latest food and agricultural history of Ghana since pre-colonial times.
Yes.
You would find that on Oxford Research Encyclopedia of African History. And so the idea largely was to, for example, was to emphasize how technology gave Europeans advantage, and I mean shipbuilding technology, to be able to explore other territories, to trade in slave, to colonize, and eventually also to repatriate, right? So that is one. The other one on agriculture was to emphasize some of the discussions on how Europeans, for example, paid attention to the planting of commercial crops or oil palm, cocoa, Funtumia elastica or rubber, and then coffee, cotton, and all that as an European agenda to make the colonized territories to rather become producers of raw materials to, I mean, service the industrializing European states or, if you like, metropoles who were producing semi-finished products and finished products and were trading it back through their trading regimes or companies, right? The European trading companies that would come and trade in Africa. So fundamentally, I was using that to establish that, to have that discussion. What I wanted to also share with you is on Chromex example I was talking about, where I'm saying that there is a post-independence agenda by African leaders, and noticeable amongst them is Kwame Nkrumah. The title of that, let me put the title there. You may search for it. Let me just put it in the chat, where he sought to pursue an integration of traditional medicine, right? That's the title. African Traditional Healing and Biomedicine, a reconstruction of colonial and post-independence healthcare history under Kwame Nkrumah, 1951 to 1966. This is authored by myself and one of my colleagues, right? So it's just to read for you to have a reflection. The idea is not for me to give you only European sources, but also to at least try to draw your attention to.
That's what I want.
Yes, African sources as to some of the examples I'm trying to give, right? That's the point I'm trying to make. Yeah. So I'm trying to draw attention to the fact that post-independence, some African leaders were now interested in emphasizing some of our local knowledge, which was rejected by the Europeans during the colonial period. For example, they were against traditional medicine in particular. they vehemently fought against traditional medicine. I don't know whether you can share some examples when it comes to your turn, but the fact of the matter is that they resisted traditional medical practice, indigenous philosophies and belief systems, and pushed it to the periphery, used the agency of Christianization, used the agency of colonial policies and all that. And a lot of these are replete in a lot of my writings on Asante, among the Asante people of Ghana. And I discuss a lot of these interactions between the local people and the British colonial administration, the extent of the impact. Aspects I think were positive and largely the aspects that are negative. But at the heart of it is that we cannot make any sensible inference about domination of a territory. What is important is that I try as much as possible to raise the discussions to include what is purported to be positive and what is generally a subtle way of further colonizing the territories that they found themselves. The final summary I will end on before we continue with your thoughts based on your readings is the fact that we then stepped into more of, to go beyond advocacy in our discussions, to look at shifting from just having a vision about a new Africa, just in name, not just in name or just in speech, but rather to take practical steps to deal with the subject. So some discussions, they need to create our own self-repair. The need for us to work harder to give to our own people. And that the case is that when it comes to us as Africans and people of African descent or Africans in the diaspora, you have to do, much more. One of the young men who is a vlogger, a social media influencer in Ghana, I'm sure some of you might have come across his name. He's called Wadamaya. He's on social media, YouTube, traveling across the Caribbean and other parts of the world, seeking to build the African narrative and to let people return back to Africa. Many a times he shares the challenges, for example, the bottlenecks he faced in his Odyssey or in his journey toward the Caribbean and elsewhere, how he finds it difficult navigating or traveling with the African passport as an African. The other discussions which came up concerning the post-neo-colonial narratives and post-independence narrative as to the essence of decolonizing is to have a more radical population and to do more advocacy and also more action than advocacy. And also the need to create our own system and be strong in the area of implementation, and also further create our own knowledge systems and work together on other social and economic emancipatory agenda. And I shared a lot of thoughts that at least suggested that I'm interested in the Pan-Africanist agenda to push for a common identity and to establish a new reality. Now, based on your reading, I want us to also see your reflection with the new readings you have done. What were the motives again for colonization and the responses from the local population, right? Now, how that transcends supranational agenda as discussed by Kenneth the other time and the others. The challenges about the conceptual realities of colonization and new colonization or colonialism in present times, based on your readings. The tapping of local resource, and in terms of local resource, if you look at it from the slave trade, we are looking at the human resource. And if you look at colonization proper, you are looking at both human resource and the natural resource. They need to exploit both natural, human, and also to deploy the element of taxation to further expropriate, take away from the local people. And then the other discussions on reparations that has also emerged in the the post-colonial narrative, that there should be a reverse or a net flow of resources to formerly colonized territories from the colonizers. I rest my case on this, and I hope that you are going to present us with new reflections and responses to guide us as we move forward. Kenneth, Robin, Letitia, Barbara, Joyce, and all the others, if you can take the floor, you can put up your hand or just jump in and let's have a conversation based on the readings you have done so far and what are some of the things you reflected on. And if there are questions you have, you can pose it and we all can begin to reflect on that and find some new pathways going forward. Thank you very much.
Yes, Professor, I've the topic you discussed, and actually one of the articles, I think it was, let me see. Oh, yeah, there was one article called "The Class Consequences of Colonialism in Africa."
Right.
That directly touched upon some of the discussions we had last time about the capitalist way of economy operating. Well, in this case, then the structure that Europe was about to implement on their own region, on their own continent. They, because they invaded so many other territories worldwide, they forced their structure also upon the other regions who were doing their own development from an economic point of view. But then also in the article, you could see it was disrupted. And the way the colonizers actually set up a global economy. Yeah, that was also how then it influenced the development of all the other regions in the world, because they were forced to become deliverers of the raw material for the profit of the how do you call it, the upper class in the capitalistic system. Because also in the article it shows you there are multiple classes within a capitalistic system, and most of the other regions worldwide were forced to be part of the lower class. The thing that the promise, actually, I think it's a promise, yeah, the promise that the capitalistic system has in itself is that there is an possibility for upward mobility. Well, that's what I guess, because a lot of people, even though they are in the lower class, still I call it believe in this whole system, and therefore participate in the I call it, that it will still be this system that that will rule the world, because they do believe in this capitalistic system, in the option to upward mobility, and that one time they can become part of the top in the triangle, because basically it's still a triangle hierarchical system, and but the reality is, once you're in the bottom layer of this triangle of the capitalistic system, it's very hard to move away from it. That's a reality that we've seen over the last 100 years. But still, people are very positive and they believe in the upward mobility. And therefore, you see that in a lot of regions, people perpetuate, they keep this system alive. And I think there are also other ideologies or philosophies of different economic systems where there's like equal participation in, I call it, wealth, riches, health system, etc. So there's a different knowledge system out there, but not too many people, or it's not well propagandized. So the propaganda is less than the propaganda that we encounter in the in the current system, world system we are part of. And I think you mentioned other people like Kwame Nkrumah, who came up with a different philosophy, normen en waarden. Also how to, so like for social systems and for economic systems. And there were more people also from the African continent, the South American continent, who came with different philosophies, often going back to pre-colonial systems also, or pre-colonial ways of living with each other. But they don't have the means to do the propaganda for their ideology and philosophies enough to to battle the current way of Eurocentric thought and capitalistic thought that is very dominant now all over the world. Also, another thing I was reading in one of the articles, let me see if I wrote it down, 1 second. Yeah, so we did discuss that maybe the colonization movement was initially started with greed, but I think next to greed, we also have to take into consideration things like power dynamics and status, because around the time that all this colonization movement started, you could also see that the Christian church, they felt more superior towards the Jews and the Muslims, because especially you had the Inquisition in Spain, and they had just kicked out a lot of the Muslim believers from the south of Spain also, and it moved through Europe, this whole thought. And they also, was around the same movement, they quit with their own European indigenous belief system, because they were burning witches and wizards. So there's a real power dynamic ongoing. So men were superior to women, Christianity was superior to Judaism and Muslim, and then later on they decided that the white European had to be superior to any other non-white person in the world. So they, next to this, the economic hierarchical structure, you also saw a social hierarchical structure, which then tried to, which actually dominated the world in the centuries after that one. I think these were next to greed also a power dynamic thing that propelled the whole colonial ideology and philosophy to try to rule the world. And you talked about in one of your articles about the technology boom that they had. So the technology boom was made possible by the theft of the riches from other continents. but also by the use of lots of military power. So, because when you go on a trading mission, normally you don't take that many guns or cannons on your trading ships, but they did. So they went around the world using the technology of shipbuilding and also gun warfare or militarism to also establish the way how to divide up the world from in power dynamics. So who was more powerful than who else, etc. Yeah, there was a couple of things that stood out when I was looking at the articles. And I think until this day, these power dynamics haven't changed that much. So I'm happy to hear from other
Thank you very much.
participants. Yeah, I'm happy to hear from other people in the session if they saw the same thing or if they saw something else.
Let's take some additional thoughts. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your insightful reflections from the sources that you have engaged. Thank you very much. Can we take other thoughts? Can we take other thoughts? Barbara, can we get your thoughts? Can you share some thoughts? Barbara. Is Barbara around? Joyce. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yes, of course, I do have my thoughts about how the colonialism has infected the colonized economies. And I agree with Kenneth, but I want to add this part of my thought also, that let's see it like this: the way the color, let's say the colonists treat the early colonized nation. For example, when we look at our economy and the way the things goes, like for example, I will take Suriname and the Netherlands. And then I will state the visa part of the way they look at our economy. It's like the Surinamese people with the Surinamese nationality have to, even though they are on a higher level in the economically independence, like for their personal household and so on. I don't know. Maybe I don't find the real words in English. So if someone can help me that understand a bit what I want to say, you can come in, and thanks for that. But I want to see the way they look at us up till now, and that it's like they don't let us be the one that decide on our economy. It's like there's always a reason for us to go back to those countries for. It's like there's no independent economically. And so we see also the way they treat our people with the demand of visa. it's like you want to go to live there because their economy is better, and they treat you that way, even though you have the opportunity and the possibility to go on vacation. It's they still look down at us, and I think that they look down because they know what they are doing exactly on holding our economy on a certain level, not to move on in some ways. If we look at the regulations, like the European regulation for agricultural products and so on, it's like there is already a barrier, a blockage for us to go to the European market. So the small market of Suriname cannot compete in production to stay in agriculture. In the production, we need to go further to have some more how do you call it? Have some more independence on the way we make our money. So that part, it's clearly demonstrated, and that's one of the thing I was thinking about searching out my opinion on that matter. Yes. I won't go to the political part because it's also one of the thing I see, and which shows also the way we are still connected, and like not only connected but also depending on the colonists. But I will leave it here for now for the others to come in. Thank you.
Prof. Jimmy, are you still there?
Hello. Okay.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
let me quickly reflect on, just to highlight what she talked about, that they need to pay attention to how the Europeans perceive Africans and people of African descent. There's also a kind of, if you like, they find ways to stifle or to make sure that Africans and people of African descent would always return back to them to beg for arms in many respects. Ghana is now gone back to IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And these Bretton Woods institutions would always direct and tell you how you should run your economy. If your priority is education and that which you know that your country is in need of, they could say that education should not be your priority. Once you are coming with cap in hand to ask for arms, then they tell you what you should do to your economy. And we saw this in the 1970s and the 1980s with the structural adjustment policies from the IMF and the World Bank, which introduced the out-of-pocket costs or full cost recovery for healthcare, for example. And if you want to read more, just Google my name. I've written a lot and discussed, if you like, the national health insurance scheme in Ghana, and also I've discussed that of Rwanda in a book chapter I contributed to, Epidemics and Health Systems of African Nations. One of the fundamental things is that in the case of Ghana, it caused a lot of death because most people could not have access to hospitals, so they could not go. They have to spend out of pocket immediately. They did not have the economic capacity and wherewithal to be able to go to hospital and to be taken care of. So that was a challenge. There were other sectors that were held by government, which were privatized, and partly it looked as if the privatization agenda seemed to be gaining traction and making some gains. Rawlings, who was the head of state at the time as a military leader, made some giant strides and efforts. But if you reflect on the structural adjustment policies, there were many gaping holes or gaps, and it was a bit problematic in the area of healthcare in particular and other social dynamics. So, I mean, they find ways to make sure that Africans and people of African descent will return to them to ask for requests. The other thing is that she also touched on questions about human movement. And that is very cynical, as you see today, especially if you look at questions about migration and refugee status and discussions, right? It's critical because when you look at how in present times Europeans want to come to Africa, it's easy. When Africans and people of African descent want to travel to Europe, say France or UK and all that, it's as if you have to respond to an encyclopedic query. You have to literally respond to litany of questions, list a bouquet of questions. I mean, tall list of questions. Fill a tall form, go there. Sometimes you are subjected to ridicule. And like our sister said, even when you have your own money, you've done so well in your own local economy, and you are just going there as for a tourist visa or to visit just for holidays, you are treated like a leper. And that is a critical question that has racial undertones, like Kenneth seemed to have pontificated or raised. These are racial undertones. Racialism. Like I said the last week, 2 weeks lecture, about the fact that when the Europeans and the Africans gave birth, the mixed race unions, the mulattoes they referred to, became merchant princes. They became priests. They had some social status as compared to their local black counterparts. And so when in America, mulattoes or mixed race unions are referred to as Africans, in Africa, they had a higher status, even though their status was not up to their European parents and their European counterparts. Because they had European blood, so to speak, in them, and African blood, they were considered superior than their African brethren. So you get the dynamics of what I'm talking about. If you read my article, let me share with you an interesting article I wrote some time ago. Let me see where I find it. But very interesting, on skin bleaching. And I try to share very interesting thoughts on some of these things, and I make reference to some of these arguments, because there is a question about racialism, racial identity, racial undertones in a lot of the things we talk about. Let me give you part of the thoughts. The period I cover is the 1950s up to 2015, but I reflect on some of the earlier colonial period. Do you have the title now? Can you see it? Let me see if I can share the link too. Please, do you have it in the...
Yeah, I see it in the chat. Skin bleaching narratives.
Yes.
Responses from women, bleachers, and stakeholders. Yeah.
Yes. I share some of the colonial reasons for skin bleaching, for example, why a brown person or dark-skinned person would want to turn into a white person. And I give racial and colonial undertones and share very interesting dynamics within the earlier period. But these are the stark realities our sister was talking about. Because sometimes it's as if you have to, how do I point to it? You are half of a human when you relate with them. You have to go an extra mile. Okay, so I'll share the link to the PDF. You have to go an extra mile to make a point. Then also to emphasize trade regulations, and sometimes in present times, they force the hands of even our politicians and government actors to patronize European goods, even if there are local goods that are being produced that have competitive pricing. They would want to force Africans to buy European chicken, Chinese chicken, buy European products and all that, even when you have local content or local produce that could, if you like, that is quite necessary to get a country to say that we are not interested in buying or importing again. But they have what we call trade regulation, which she talks about. Trade restrictions to the extent that they block African products and other products from the Caribbean. Other sometimes they consider it to be substandard and all that, and rather focus attention on Africans rather producing raw materials and shipping it to them. So the trade imbalances and all that is very critical. Again, there is a challenge, where you have to look at how we trade amongst ourselves as compared to the size, the quantum of imports that we do or receive from the Americas and from Europe as compared to the trade we do amongst ourselves. If you look at the ECOWAS market, it's a huge one, but we don't do much trade. There's a new African trade arrangement which is going on, and we are hoping that within the continent, that arrangement will be able to see a certain light of day for us to be able to make greater gains from there. I don't know whether I've attempted a good summary of your thoughts, my sister. My sister, did I do well? Joyce, was I able to attempt a good summary of your thoughts? Okay, Joyce is not hearing me.
Prof,
Joyce,
I'm sorry, with the time to get to the microphone
okay.
to open it. Yes, it's a good indication of what I was talking about, indeed. When you were explaining, if I may say this a bit, talking about the IMF, and there you see what, because of their regulation, you see also not only the economy but also politics are touch negatively, I will see, because politicians are obliged to do what IMF say, and the regulations of IMF uh, are therefore put into place so that the politicians make decisions that influence the economy and of their country. And there you have also that other politicians are not might not agree with others, so you have a fight, and you see the independence there are that we depend on them even when we think we are not. And you were also talking about the visa. Today, I accompany my husband to the embassy of the USA, and it's the same. It is like you are before a God that is questioning you about your life and your lifestyle and want to know everything, just for the reason that you want to go on vacation or we want to spend some time in their so-called country. You see, so it is not easy, because for me, I am thinking, why can't we stop this? But when you go on and find out some more how do you facts on why it's like this, you see that they are willingly en hoe zeg je dat, opzettelijk? Is it willingly?
On purpose.
Yes, they are doing it on purpose. They are very structural on it. They are working on a system to colonize us, even though we think we are independent. Like my husband is Ivorian and from Ivory Coast, and he says our country is a department of French. It's a we don't have a president. We have a district commissary, because everything French wants, that's what we do.
Yeah.
So you see, and you will ask yourself, but why? And even though we try, and when I talk about we, I mean Africa and all the African diaspora and so on. Why can't we stand up and do something about it? And that question remains in my head. You see a difficulty for African to come to Suriname. Why can't we have a direct flight from the African continent to Americas, to South America, or name it, Suriname? Why not? Why can't we have that? Because Europe have to come in. We don't have enough money. We will say the market is not big enough. They may find any reason to say it is not possible. But why don't we try it? And who is the regulator? And when you look at who is the regulator, then they are there, whiting up the place. I'm not discriminating, but I never was. How do you say that? Ik was nooit onder de indruk van witte mensen, hoor. Van ja, zijn wit. Dus. And I want to say this, and I don't want to be negative to other country members, say it like that, landgenoten, my fellow country members. I don't want to be negative, but I hear an interview from the director of Staatsolie Maatschappij, and he said, you are also seeing a few white people walking around here, and so you know that we are not joking. We are with a serious business, and we are not doing something because of doing something. And I was like, huh? There you go again. A company like Staatsolie who thinks that because they are white, that is serious business. And the bigger jokers are the white people. But we cannot see it ourselves. So it's very complicated. I would have liked to say that talking about it in this course and maybe on other platforms might help, but I know we are far from that. Really, we are really far from that. So when you see what happens at embassies and everywhere, it's not easy.
I'm told, Joyce, I'm told that the Rwandese are given as much as 10 years or so if they want to travel to UK or America. The UK's arrangement with Rwanda to take illegal immigrants to Rwanda. I have talked about that in one of my short pieces. Let me share with you on Head UK platform. During the COVID season, I did a lot of fights with these Europeans, especially on the Unheard platform. But one of the very fundamental things I look at is the major possibilities of Africans representing themselves, and also Africans, the view of Africans being respected and not placed at the periphery or at the back burner and say that, no, because these are Africans, they do not have anything to offer. A lot of the times we have seen that challenge. Let me see if I can share some of the thoughts I shared on Head. But there are a lot of the things you see. I have 6 pieces. One is on the Russia-Ukraine stuff. The others are purely related to COVID and other issues. But my argument is that there should be the African voice that pushes whatever we are looking at. And the Rwanda example is where we sometimes, so these are, I have, during the COVID season, there are about 5 pieces I wrote for Unheard UK. The other one is on News Africa, but the others, 5 of them are on Head UK. These are short pieces you can easily read to enjoy. It is not like critical academic pieces, but these are good to read, exciting pieces I wrote for Head. But when you talk about what you are talking about, I'm of the view that it's always the case that Africans are disrespected. I remember, sorry to say what I'm about to say, a guy who was kissing somebody in a what do you call it, in an escalator during the COVID season was appointed as a COVID, how do you call it, emissary or envoy to Africa. That is why I wrote my piece on him, Matt Hancock. It's part of the pieces I've sent to you. I said, Matt Hancock, Africans do not need you. Right? There's another piece I wrote on Tony Blair, for example, concerning vaccine hesitancy in Africa and some of the things, some of the gibberish, or some of the, for want of a right word, some of the wayward comments he was passing. I almost said useless comments he was passing. I responded to that on Unheard UK. You read some of these pieces there. I've shared all of them with you. But the point is that we need pragmatic leaders, leaders who are radical enough, who are interested in shaping the narrative of Africa and redefining the course and how the arrangements have been historically. You are right when you talk about the Ivory Coast situation. In the first lecture we had, I tagged on based on Francophone West Africa. The word I use with a lot of disagreement in the core of my being, where we have Francophone Africa, Lusophone African, Anglophone Africa. These delimitation and characterizations or definition of our persons with the Francophone, Anglophone, Lusophone in itself tells who we are as a people who don't have identity with respect to what the Europeans sought to do with colonization. However, in the case of French West Africa, they did the CFA francs. The whole policy of assimilation and association was aimed at making French colonies, citizens in sovereign states as part of the metropole, the satellite states or the territories they colonized. The members, the citizens of those territories would be made French citizens. In many respects, you are a lesser citizen, and then they also control their central bank. So these countries do not have their central bank. French companies sell to them. French companies do projects for them. They have the first say in terms of things before any other thing. And we are right to say that presidents are seen as governors or high commissioners, or better still, as state envoys and all that. They do not have their own sovereign capacity. And I made reference to the new Senegal president, who is saying that he has a new agenda, and that agenda is to delink his country from France. There are critical questions. If you look at the Rwanda issue, Paul Kagame, whom I make reference to in the chapter I said I wrote on national health insurance and compared Ghana and Rwanda's case. I mean, Paul Kagame is not a saint. However, after Paul Kagame has exited, would we say that Rwanda was a miracle, or Rwanda was a deliberate, was a state that was deliberately forging ahead and developing? The past days, I've spent time watching a lot of documentaries on Rwanda to want to ask myself whether Rwanda is a miracle that is working, or is a pragmatic state that is being built, sequentially and systematically by the right kind of leadership. So I am arguing that if Rwanda is doing it, then we could make some gains. Some time ago, there were some discussions also about Botswana, whether it's also a miracle or it's working in many respects. So because the reason I say that is that Ghana's economy was doing well. Suddenly, post-COVID is gone haywire. We have gone back to IMF. The indicators these Bretton Woods institutions use to even define and dictate the world economic order, it's in itself problematic. And so there are new standards and outlines or measurements they use to measure which country is doing well. The economies of states, the world main markets, are dictated by the pounds and the euros and the dollar. These came about through institutionalization, i.e., in the case of the euros, the European Union coming together. In the case of UK, it came about through colonization, because they collected a lot of gold from Africa to use our gold as a bullion to back the pound. In the case of the Americans, post-Second World War gave them the upper hand to also leverage through the alliances and cleavages. So there are several things in the creation of the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, to consolidate that. Today, Russia is trying to change the narrative with China. The Gulf countries, as Kenneth will make a reference to the other, are beginning to see how they have to forge alliance with the capitalist states like US and France and all the other countries. and today's dynamic between Israel and Palestine and all the other issues we're talking about. So there are critical issues, but I think fundamentally we should have leadership, and African leaders must show the way. They should not be afraid to die. They should not be afraid being poisoned by the West. They should not be afraid being assassinated. We need some people who are willing to make sacrifices, and I think that we can turn something around. And these are the major highlights I think we can look at. Patrice Emerson Lumumba was killed. Kwame Nkrumah, there were so many assassination attempts on him. The Sankara, the gentleman you mentioned, the Burkinabe, was also assassinated, right? Or was dealt with by the West. I have said time and again, the Tanzanian leader Magufuli suddenly died during the COVID season. I have not recovered from it, right? There are a lot of questions to raise and to talk about. You may think these are conspiracy theories and misinformation. Once Africans talk about it, it is conspiracy theory. Once African leaders decide to raise issues about it, it is misinformation. And the same thing happened during the COVID era, when Ghana had made efforts to produce Nimiba. It was not a discussion. We have cure for COVID, simple. But it was not topical anywhere. The Africa's miracle and survival, or ability to survive the COVID, BBC Africa reported it as that Africans were not dying because of poverty. How silly that is, right? And so that is the case, but we need leadership to be able to drive that. And that is why in any classroom I stand or sit, I'm as straightforward as I am, because I'm willing for anything. Because the reality is that except we are willing to go an extra mile, we can't unfetter ourselves from such direct and subtle post-colonial agenda, which Nkrumah predicted and prophesied. Kenneth, I saw you coming in. If you can have your substantive point on that, we can take other thoughts. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think the statements that Joyce and yourself made do also fit my line of thinking. So what you will see with the global economic order demands a certain status quo, and also it's seen on a macro level, but also on a micro level within states and also within communities. And the certain countries or communities who want to escape the current status quo or want to escape the global economic order, they are often targeted as a sample what not to do. So, for instance, the 50-year economic blockade of Cuba is clearly a show of, if you step out of the global economic order, you will be punished. And it's a punishment for the other countries also, for the rest of the world. Same thing now will happen with Venezuela. It happened with Nicaragua. It happened with Guinea, when they said, I read the other article from Cooper, where they said most countries, when they were in the independent movement, stayed aligned with France. Guinea with Sékou Touré, I think, they said, no, let's break all bonds. And then they were almost destroyed with almost brought to poverty. And when something like that happens, the status quo knows, or the global economic order knows, that the citizens of a country, when they look around, they will oppose their own government. So also, new governments, they know we should not break with the global economic order, or else our time in office is very limited. There will be a people revolution because of the poverty that happens. So you do need certain leaders with charisma and are very strong, who can resist this threat from outside. And this example of showing or making rebels or people who want to change things, activists, an example dates back a long time, because we know these stories from the days of when at slavery. Whenever somebody was a rebel, they would get this barbaric punishment, like being burned alive, etc., so that other people who even had a slightly thought of being a rebel would, what do you call it, leave this thought from their head. And it's also so you see this with countries, with individuals, or with groups. Whenever you oppose the global system or the status quo, you risk the chance of being punished very, very, very strongly. And the thing with, you mentioned Rwanda, I was also wondering how come that they, within a short time span, became an economic example for the region. I do think that they still have, do not really oppose the global economic order. And also they have these discussions with some countries in the West, especially the UK, or fighting the migration from Africans to Europe. So they would be like the, how do you call it? The place where people would get sent back, even though you're not even from, so if you come from Sudan or Mali, you will get sent back to Rwanda. So they still are a little bit in line with the global economic order, and therefore they still can be rewarded. But whenever any of these leaders think, okay, I want to follow my own agenda and do it differently, then I think Saddam Hussein was one of the examples. What can happen if you do not follow anymore the status quo and the global economic order? So for new leaders, they have to be smart. So they have to, one time, play along, but in the meantime also execute the agenda to uplift their own economy and the education level of their own people. So yeah, that's you have to be very tactical in this type of situation, it seems like.
That's a very solid contribution to this point, because I am of the view that sometimes you maybe seem to be playing along, but you should have an agenda that is going to satisfy the interest of your local population. And I think we need to watch the Rwanda case closely and see how the outcomes in the future will be. Yes, we now see if we can go on break. I think we can, yes. I think we can go on break. And when we return, we shall take the other views and then we shall summarize and leave, right?
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Yes.
Who wants to say something? Joyce, did you want to say something?
Yes, I was asking a question just for after the break. The South African situation with Malema. I wanted to know if what the opinion of the lecturer is about that when we return.
Sure, we will ask him then.
Yes, thank you.
Before we take the reflections on from the others and what they've read and their inputs, I will quickly discuss what Joyce asked. Yes, I do not know whether South Africa has any challenge, for example, with Julius Malema as an individual, but I think that just as we all know, his political tradition is from the African National Congress, the ANC. He had his own challenges within the ANC and he was sacked. He formed the Economic Freedom Fighters, as we all know. In many respects, their core mandate would be to expropriate land from the apartheid system, especially for those who hold lands that are in excess in many respects, to revert back to the state for redistribution. I do not know whether that is dissimilar from that which Robert Mugabe executed in Zimbabwe, which led to a lot of killings and all that. and also conflict and riot on farms and all. The fundamental challenge is that it seems to me that the ANC is becoming a monotony in terms of development in South Africa. The kind of leaders they have produced since independence in the 1990s, especially in the case of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela could not do 2 terms. He would have essentially, what was he going to do for 2 terms? He was already spent, but he is a unifier, as we know. And that purpose is what I believe fundamentally Mandela sought to achieve, that he would push a rainbow nation. You have Africans, you have Indians there, you have the Europeans there, right? The Africans, I meant, and the other groups making South Africa a rainbow nation in that respect, where there are different people with different origins and, if you like, ethnicities and orientation that would form part and be part of the new nation South Africa. A question which is being asked is whether the EFF politics, as espoused by or led by Julius Malema and the other young men, whether it pushes the Rainbow Nation agenda, right? There is the DA party, which is more tilted towards, if you like, the Europeans or the Africans and the other elitist groups and all that. Whether Julius's message has been taken serious is something we need to explore. Yes, I believe around this time they've taken him serious. He's made a lot of inroads. They've represented their people both aggressively and also serving in committees in many respects to push the developmental agenda in South Africa. They've brought cases against the former president who was sacked, raised different queries and cases against the current president, and they continue to do their job as an opposition party within South Africa's parliament. And for me, that is the beauty of democracy, where different voices and different opinions can be shared and different perspectives as to how they see the development of South Africa as a country. Many and several people see Julius Malema's posture as too radical for the South African nation, and such a leader may not be able to forge a unity front in terms of keeping the country together. But I feel that sometimes youthful exuberance and all that plays a role. As he grows and his ideas are tested, I believe they'll be much more refined. But the EFF as an institution itself is very categorical as to its orientation toward Russia, China, and those socialist-oriented countries that seek for communal basis of things and state ownership. In many respects, that would counteract the property-owning capitalist, notions and practices that has allowed for a few Indians and other Europeans to have opportunity to have what they have referred to as the state capture. And persons like Praveen and other groups he refers to, who have held political power and have become close allies and, if you like, acolytes of the Africans who hold political power. That is the disruption the EFF brings, where by the next day, if they are in power, they will be able to do that. But what is equally interesting is that today, the EFF is promising jobs. They are promising piece of land to those who need land. They are promising with their new global politics closure of Israeli embassy in South Africa if they win power. But that is the question. Would that look like Mandela's South Africa? Or that is another radical move which rather would seek to break the back of new colonialism, and that which would also seek to push the boundaries beyond post-apartheid arrangements that what Mandela's government had with the Europeans in South Africa. And would that give much more benefits to the Africans and all that? I think the vestiges of colonialism rubs on South Africa vehemently in many respects, because I think it took away a lot of things. Self-pride, created social dissonance, crime is very high. And one of the things they talk about today, I mean, I was in South Africa some few years ago. I was in Johannesburg, and I saw nightlife there. We had to go out and eat and all that. It's not easy because you park your car and people come by it. It's like that. Critical questions. I don't mean to use that scenario to stereotype, to say that the entire South Africa is like that. But the crime is high. And that is exactly what the EFF seeks to argue, that, look, they will be able to deal with the question of crime in South Africa once they get power. It suggests to me that it seems some people are benefiting from crime in South Africa, and the EFF feels that they have the magic bullet, or by a magic wand, abracadabra, they'll be able to turn things around. So some of the provinces are too juicy. But in a practical sense, you want to ask yourself whether governments work like that. Again, is Malema himself ready for political leadership in terms of leading the country? That I beg to say I cannot tell. But crime-ridden South Africa, questions about unemployment, the need for land ownership, and many other issues of corruption which has bedeviled the South African state. For me, it gives me some happiness when you have parties like the EFF and the others coming up to challenge the status quo, being led by the African National Congress, the ANC. The other obvious realities are that some are arguing that if you vote for the EFF, are you not necessarily also voting for the ANC? Because a lot of these EFF members are disgruntled ANC members. But I believe the reason why you ask the South African situation with Julius Malema is the fact that we are all talking about the kind of leadership that Africa needs to drive the African agenda and to drive the kind of development that will unfetter, or better still, unshackle or set us loose from the apron strings or control of the West. In a picturesque sense, or I mean, if you look at it from an outward outlook, you are likely to think that Julius Malema will be that voice demonstrably. Demonstrable over time, that unsettles the Africans, unsettles the Indians in many respects, unsettled the other colored races, and unsettled the ANC, and unsettled the, if you like, the status quo. And if that is what South Africa needs to turn around, and if that is what South Africa needs to tell a new African story, that should be the case. He himself, one of the brightest points is the fact that he talks about, they need to see ourselves as Africans, and that as Africans, we grew up on the homeland. We have not come from anywhere. And his argument is that there should not be xenophobia, as you see in sometimes a xenophobic South Africa, where Africans are attacked by other Africans and they are told to go back to their own country. Malema has said over time, where should they go to? Are they not Africans? And that he makes reference to not only Mandela himself and the other stalwarts who have played significant role in South Africa's freedom and emancipation, but the fact that other countries and other actors within Africa contributed to South Africa's emancipation. It's very essential that such united front is sought in South Africa's internal politics, i.e. economic and social dynamics, so that other Africans are not treated as outsiders in South Africa. And he seemed to make such suggestion that the Nigerians aren't going anywhere, the Ghanaians are not going anywhere, or any other groups that are found there are not going anywhere. The Zimbabweans are not going anywhere because they are Africans and that is their home. So a certain Pan-Africanist construct of things is seen in his speech and posture, and his public discourse suggests that. I think around this time, with what I've said, Julius Malema divides opinion. And I think several charismatic leaders have done so. You find them in the Kwame Nkrumahs. You find them in the Mandelas who were defined as terrorists even after they had left prison and were working as president. They were still defined in the books of the West as terrorists. So fundamentally, strong leaders, robust leaders, articulate, charismatic, vibrant leaders divide opinion. You'll find that across the continent historically. Whether today the South Africans take him serious and would vote for him to become the leader of South Africa, I cannot tell. But I think that the African politics and narrative requires a certain leadership that has a blend of charisma, patriotism, nationalism, and diplomacy, driving a Pan-Africanist ideal that is able to create a better balance for a better future for the continent. And quite often, it can be seen in a pragmatic and charismatic leadership. I do not know whether Malema is now fully rounded for that. I cannot tell. But I think that their contribution thus far is significant to create a good political balance in South Africa. And I think that the broader narrative on the African continent, it also fits into it and also at least questions the status quo and makes everyone understand that the young men will not allow things to remain as such. And so the EFF, its ideology and philosophy is really shaping discourses. New emerging forces are also coming up. But I think that is what makes the South African politics and issues quite interesting even in recent times. I don't know whether Joyce have been able to respond to your question, but if you have additional thoughts about that, we can do that. Lisbeth, do you want to say something? Ruben, are we all here? It seems to me some people have vacated the class. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus myself, right? It looks like we are left with 6, right? Here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so any additional thoughts and reflections from the readings? I'll be glad so that we can wrap up. I think we've done well on the subject. And if we can do the readings, anytime Dr. Nimo invites me again to have a discussion with you, I'll be available. So let me take some additional thoughts on the readings. Sarah is not here. I think, is it, what's her name? I've forgotten her first name. I'm sure she's off here. Okay, so let's take some thoughts. Yes, any additional thoughts? Joyce, you want to say something?
Normally, I wanted to react on your view of South Africa. Right. I'm sorry, I didn't got the first part of it. Okay. But it is very clear, and while you were speaking, and even before then, when me myself, while busy thinking about the position of Black people or Black nations, say Africa in the world, maybe it might not be possible for me as a fifth year to see that and to experience that. But I think in the near future, that's what I'm seeing. I'm not a seer, but I think I can see this upcoming nation and upcoming leaders in Africa building up their countries so that in the future it will be Europe and the USA that will come to ask and to beg and to want to be an African. You see, so I'm very positive about the development of African nation, whether in diaspora or in Africa. I think we are on a good road to come there, and so I was admiring Mr. Malema, also the new president of Senegal, and name it. And I think there is a revolution going on, and I am very positive about that. Thank you.
Thank you too. Ruben, do you have any new thoughts you want to share based on your readings, something you want to highlight for us to reflect on before we close the lecture? Barbara too, if you would also want to share some thoughts, then we can wrap up. Right.
Well, actually, thank you so much for the whole class and all the reflections on the readings. I didn't really have like one specific thing to highlight, but I was reading the class Consequences of Colonialism in Africa, the reading that you sent. And it was about the aid or reparations that's needed to restructure Africa, right? And the big part of it was the class change that it had. And I was just curious about how would you make this class analysis to restructure this new class, because there's been a lot of damage, as we already spoke about, the repercussions of the post-colonialism, et cetera, et cetera. And I was just wondering, like, what kind of vision do you have besides having the leader that is going beyond status quo to lead a country? What else do you think that is needful to make these analyses for to see what the aid of or reparations are?
But do you believe in reparations?
If I do believe in reparations, I think that reparations, in the way, it's also a way of it's also a way of the colonizer. It's also a colonizer's view to say that something has to be repaired in that kind of way, right? That's your question.
Yes. Yes. So I mean, if if you believe that it's time for the colonizers, the Europeans who colonized Africa, to do what we call a reverse net flow of resources back to Africa to support the continent. Right? The discussions of reparations have come up concerning the slave trade. Discussions of reparations also come up when we look at colonialism and its effect on the African states and other states. So the question is that there should be some flow of resources or support coming from the West, because the in most instances, plundered, looted, took advantage of the local economy, exploited the traditional states, and took Africa's resources to the West. And so it's time for them to pay back in many respects. And that's what I'm trying to find out, that if you believe that the West owe Africa and they must pay.
Oh yeah, yeah, I do believe that. I do believe that, but I also do believe that that Africa has enough resources to repair itself. Do you get what I mean? That it's
Yes.
not only dependent on the West to be repaired. But I was just wondering, because the article says that because of the repercussions of colonialism is also the class changes, and that there should be a research on that, and that to do that research we have to do this, we have to make this analyze. So I was just wondering, what kind of things do you what would you, and which way would you analyze that to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I get exactly what you are talking about.
Yeah.
I think you can construe that from an anthropological studies or a sociological studies or a historical studies. You could even do something on policy related studies. But fundamentally, if you look at what countries in Asia began to do, Singapore, Malaysia, and these countries had independence in the 1960s. Ghana, the country I'm speaking from, in terms of independence, were, if you like, classmates of these countries, Singapore and the Malaysians and the others. But leaders like the Lee Kuan Yew, who led these countries, were very strong, tough, and were clear in their minds to change their narratives. China, I mean, has been a civilization state distinctively different from the West. China is thousands of years old. However, we know of the presence of, I mean, Great Britain in Hong Kong, and left only in the 1990s. But we see the influence of Western countries on different territories around, I mean, same period, the 19th and 20th centuries in Asia and in Africa. That's what I was talking about. So several of these Asian countries are now holding to their own, and they are pushing forward. And the Singaporean example and the Malaysian examples are classic examples of where countries, as a result of quality leadership, if you like, have been able to turn their fortunes around post-colonization. That's the point I'm making. And so they say everything is about leadership, and you need the kind of right political leadership that will drive the forces of production, i.e. industry, that will drive academia to think around state policy and what the state is looking for, so that academia does not sit in isolation. Academics, institutions of learning, their research, their teaching dovetails or tie into the national framework or agenda. And that comes about as a result of what the leader wants to drive the state. And then it influences the lawmaking organ of the state. For example, here in Ghana, Parliament, who then begin to pass laws or policies that will support the implementation of such acts or agenda that will feed into the national framework or developmental framework. It could be a 50-year vision, a 40-year vision, a 30-year vision, a 20-year vision, where these visions are, I mean, placed into blocks, maybe first 10 years, second 10 years, third 10 years, up to the 50th year, a jubilee year sort of, where to every 10 years, there's a milestone to be able to tell that the state has reached there. In some of these countries, like Singapore and the others I talk about, they had leaders that stayed in power for over 20 years. Sometimes we refer to some of these leaders as dictators, and that the kind of politics and democracy as found in UK, the Westminster system, or the American system should be that which is replicated in Africa. But in the case of the Singaporeans and all that, it was not like the strictest sense swallowing hook, line, and sinker. These leaders would be seen in many lights as benevolent dictators. Give you an example of Libya's Muammar al-Gaddafi. The West saw him as a dictator. Barack Hussein Obama and France went, bombed Libya and killed him, assassinated him. Libya is now a failed state. So you understand clearly that when Muammar al-Gaddafi, the leader of the Libyan state, was in power, in spite of his flaws, every young Libyan who had finished college had a free housing, was assured of accommodation, assured of employment and all that. There were several people from Africa, Sub-Sahara, from Ghana, Nigeria, and others who went for greener pastures in Libya within the African continent. The Libyan leader, who was a Pan-Africanist, could travel with a vehicle across the African territories visiting and will not travel by plane. That is an example of leadership. He wanted a common African currency that was going to be benchmarked on gold and other resources. Immediately, he dreamt that and began to push it. He was taken out. The narrative that the Western media put across was as problematic as you can think about. So in researching, I can tell you that everything is about leadership. And if you go past leadership to think about anything, we cannot have any success anywhere. A leader would have to emerge from amongst us. And when you look at the historical narrative about any part of the world, you see a class struggle, class movement, there is an insurrection or a rebellion. The leadership of that rebellion produce a new philosophy or a synthesis that goes through. If you look at China's case as example, the revolution, the 1911 one, up to China under Mao Zedong, and the revolutionary government coming together. China has gone through many forces and phases, but it's operating under its own conservative umbrella. And look at the type of leaders the Chinese, produce under their own, if you like, regimented system, which the West would not like. You can look at Russia and other countries. Africa's political structure became defunct with a superimposition of colonial laws, colonial regime, and also colonial democratic tendencies, which was sometimes too distant from Africans' internal and inherent democracy through chieftaincy. So we are already experimenting with a system we are not too familiar with. But even experimenting with such a system, you will still need right political actors, political patrons, or political leaders. A country's natural resource like gold, diamond, bauxite, manganese, uranium, as you will find in Congo, the most richest part of the world, right, will not make Congo, DR Congo, right, a paradise. Why? Because the West have been successful at not giving them right leaders, destabilizing the territory. So without leadership, we cannot talk about anything. That's the point I'm driving at. And so when you look at Africa, you look at leadership. The second thing you need to reflect on and research on is a question about, and we have already discussed that, how a lot of our leaders school abroad. They imbibe capitalist and the neo-capitalist agenda and the Western ideals and philosophy. And when they come back to lead their African territories, several of them become cronies and bootlickers of this state because they are trained by them, right? And so, whereas research, and we have to go back to what I referred to, and severally known in the literature as indigenous knowledge systems, finding practical, more nuanced ways of using African-based, local-based solutions and ideas to fix our locally generated problems, and then even problems that are superimposed upon us from the Western blocs and countries. So we need to begin to look at the insider-outsider approach. What can we do within using internal mechanism, internal research, internal outlook, and internal people to find ways of solving our local problems? A lot of the IMF experts who are brought into Africa to advise us, some of them are not more than 25 years of age. And there are professors like myself and others here who will not be consulted. So there are critical questions. But if you have a political leader who's a bootlicker, it affects the educational system because he's not asking questions about quality. He's not hiring and firing. You saw what the gentleman Magufuli did in Tanzania within his short lifespan as a leader of Tanzania. You have to report to work at 8 o'clock if that is the work time. If you report late, you are dealt with. The president rolled his sleeves and he was interested in every sector and department of Tanzania. That is the type of leadership Africans need. And we need to research how we are breeding leaders. Give you an example. Two major things have contended Africa's development in terms of its politics. Ethnic politics. And that is what caused the Sierra Leonean War. That is what has caused a lot of insurrections and conflict in Kenya, in a lot of their politics. You were Kikuyu, you were a Kalenji, you were from... so different groups feel that they are more superior than the others. And that is a post-colonial hegemonic structure, so that we see ourselves as different. It is the same philosophy that caused the African Union to fail and was named Organization of African Unity. And that we did not have a United States of Africa because the Western countries, in a subtle manner, had African leaders who felt that we cannot unite and have a kind of unity as America had after its civil war. So you are getting it. So there are a lot of pointers to research when it comes to looking at Africa's situation. But the fundamental thing to look at is to reflect on African leadership. And once we get it right, Africa will become a paradise, I can tell you.
Okay, so you're saying it's very intricate, but if there's a strong leader that shows that it's not, how do you say that? It's not leading towards status quo, then the followers, so the people of the country also will not be afraid to not be seen as a status quo. That's what you're saying. And then we make progress.
Exactly the point. It's all about leadership. I mean, I can talk about America's Biden. What's the name? Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin, does not respect Biden.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't respect Biden. It's not America's power. He sees a weak president today. And so that is why he's relating to America the way he's relating. If he will bring in Trump, he knows Trump can press a button. Are you getting the point I'm making? It's strong leaders the world needs. It's always like that. When Boris Yeltsin was giving a lot away to the West, the West was able to influence Russia in many respects. So he's always the leader. Everything is about leadership. Everything. If you bring it to the local household, the family, and the leader of the family is messing up, everyone is messed up. I can tell you that. So that's why I said you can study it anthropologically, sociologically, politically, and all that. Right.
And my last question is, you said the leaders, most of them were schooled abroad, and you think that there's enough information, indigenous information, to lead the countries.
Give you an example. A lot of the war formations that the Western countries are using today came from Asante, my ethnic group. Read a lot more on Asante history. If you go to UK, where they train you, a lot of the military strategy, warfare, they picked it from Asante. So we have history as a people. We have to learn it and use it. It's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Barbara, you want to share some thoughts? Or Joyce, you want to speak to us?
Yes. I don't really have a thought to share for this moment, but I see that leadership will be part of the instruments for African nations to come to the point of the independence that is needed, the change, let's say it like that, the change, the revolution that is needed. Because why I asked for the Malema case, he himself say, if I'm correct, it's either they kill me,
right,
I will be the next president.
Yes, he said that several times, even at the court, right? When he's been under.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that because that's leadership. That's believing in what you are going for and what you want to do in the future for your country. So he's ready to die for everything that he wants to do for his nation. So we need a lot of those kind of leaders in Africa and in also the other countries in diaspora. Looking back at Ivory Coast, since my husband is there, he's giving me a lot of updates. Yesterday, I was told that Ukraine is opening embassy in Abidjan.
Okay.
What means that the president of Ivory Coast is not on the point yet for this change.
Okay.
So, because a lot of other countries around in Africa really invite Russia.
Right.
So the Russian case, you might say Russia is not black, but when you look at the way things are going and the way they are handling Russia, you can say that's also because Russia does not really sell the opinion, does not really share the same values as Europe and USA. So the Russian case is also one of those that we can compare to Africa. So I think in the near future, we will need really people, and not only the leaders, but the persons to be lead, to understand that we have to go somewhere, and the somewhere is to break up from the European Western way of thinking and saying that that's the best of it. Looking at one of the readings about the white the black women bleaching themselves just to be beautiful. So all those kind of mind change have to put in place before arriving to the point we need to be, and that's
yes,
a change and change.
Yes. So
yes.
Joyce, I mean, exactly the point. So that if you have a good political leadership, I use a term who are conscious. If you have a conscious African leaders, then they would be interested in conscientizing the nation. And
Yes.
they would have policies, right? Speak to policies, support policies, sponsor policies that would affect the educational system to focus on the insider-outsider approach, where we use our own knowledge systems and strategies and ways. Yes, we learn from others too, but we have to also learn from within. I respect the other additional argument you make that the followers too have a responsibility. We call it 360 degrees leadership. So that if I'm appointed as a minister of agriculture, my success in that sector, in the collective sense, affects the success of the president or the head of state. If I'm failing as an agriculture minister, definitely the president is failing in that sector. So fundamentally, the followers would have a role to play. But if the followers find, for a better of a right word, buffoonery in the leader, they find him to be a puppet, they find him to be a thief, they find him to have no objective, they will just dance to his tune and will just continuously mess the country up. So fundamentally, the posture of the leader, his aspirations, affect every fiber of society, including the one who is at the lower echelons of society. And we saw that in this country. I can tell you, give you an example. Our former president did a coup in Ghana in 1979, 24 September 1979. And then, before, June 4th, 1979. And 24 September 1979, he handed over power to a democratically constituted government. The president the one who became president was President Hillary Liman. Just some few years, 2 years or so, 31st December 1981, President Rawlings, then the Flight Lieutenant Rawlings, overthrew the well-constituted democratic government in Africa. That's one of the problems Africans have had, coup d'etat. Overthrew him in a coup d'etat. Now, he took over, he stayed in power as a military leader for about 15 to 18 years. In 1991, we went into a new democratically constituted country, and President Rawlings, who was then Chairman Rawlings, became a president, a democratic president. He served his term, finished, a new government came. Tell you a story. One day he was driving to his house. It had rained. This was captured on television. There was a traffic. No car was moving. The whole place was jammed. The traffic had become like extreme. No car was moving. He got out from his vehicle. This former president got out from his vehicle under the rain, rolled his sleeves, and began to direct the road traffic. Listen, this is not somebody telling me. There were police officers there who could not direct the traffic. Immediately, everyone saw him. Everyone began to act right. He was not the president at the time. He was a former president. I'm talking about caliber of leadership. Because immediately they saw him, they remembered who he was as a leader and what he represented. And even though he was not the president at the time, you could not do wrong whilst he was standing there. You are getting what I'm trying to drive at? We need certain caliber of leaders, and that will be the magic wand, I tell you.
Would you not think only, well, of course.
I'm so sorry, Kenneth. I'm so sorry. I got a phone call who break the. So I didn't hear what.
You cannot.
So the points were there. I didn't hear the final part of the story of the president. I'm sorry.
Okay. So the president, I'm saying that the president got out of his car, rolled his sleeves, directed the traffic. Everyone
Yes.
obliged. They did what was right. And I'm saying that what he did is reminiscent of who he was as the head of state and president of Ghana. And before him, no one could do wrong. And I'm saying that it epitomizes or reflects the kind of leadership Africa needs. Somebody who's robust, who is tough, and who is visionary and want a change. And when you have that person, you have some milestones. And if you have somebody who is too soft, who has no bearing, who comes because his party just nominated him and then the people just follow the sentiments of the crowd and put him there, sometimes they don't do so well. So you need a leader who is tough, who is robust, who is committed to a vision and is willing to execute something, a goal. And that is what Jerry John Rawlings was seen in many respects, right? And that even when he was not in power, before him, you were afraid to mess. I'll give you an example. Before he died, 2 years before he died or so, he invited me. He had followed my narrative on radio and television. And he invited me. And we had very interesting conversation. This is a gentleman who divided opinion like Julius Malema. He divided opinion. His personality was that which divided opinion. He would tell you just as it is. He will not give a damn. He will not care about what you feel because he felt what was his truth is what he will communicate. And that was Rawlings. And so if you look at Africa and we want to position it like the West, and that suddenly our leaders should behave like the Western leaders, then nothing will happen on the continent. Because if the leadership of China had behaved like the Western countries, China would not have seen technological transformation and other transformations they've seen. The Chinese society, which is a civilization society, needed a certain type of leadership. And that is what is working for them today. China will never become like the West. And as I tell you, the day it becomes like the West, China will be balkanized. It will be divided into shreds, like the Yugoslavia and the other states that were balkanized. Same will happen to China the day it decides to behave like the West, right?
Yes, that's very clear. Thank you.
You're welcome. Kenneth, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I was because you mentioned the leaders type, and luckily you did mention also that they need to have a vision for the people to believe in, because I think this vision is very important, because you have to start with improving the material condition of the people, because we live now in a very connected world, and they do see the luxury and the wealth across the borders also. So with a vision, strong leadership, and also the right propaganda that you can achieve the vision, will gather the community support which is needed to resist all the pressure from the outside world.
Right.
But sometimes, well, you mentioned the leader from Singapore, who can be seen as a benevolent dictator. He's kept there in power also because he's still in line with the Western agenda.
Right.
Having what do you call it, a financial hub in the Asian present, also like an international hub also for people trafficking. And he did allow a large portion of Western expats to earn a lot of money in his country. Similar what you see in Dubai.
Right.
And then these small city states, I would call them, are still left alone and respected by the West.
Right.
As soon as you build power and you step out of the global economic system, you can become a risk. And then you need more technical negotiation powers to resist it.
Right.
So I think when we talk about reparations, I think it's a necessity, but reparations is not handing out a bundle of cash to people or to leaders, because then you will fail. Reparations is about bringing back the knowledge systems from the past, setting up health systems from the past, and reparations also, how do you call it, this psychological damage that has been done to the people, which also causes the skin bleaching.
Right.
Also, this psychological damage needs to be repaired.
Right.
So it's not like the thing that we have here. When they said to the, how do you call it, the Holocaust victims, we do a reparation, you get so much money, and you get a country in the Middle East where you can bring all your people back. That's one part of the reparation culture that is instigated from the West. But when African people talk about reparation, they should talk about repairing the knowledge system, health system, repairing some of the psychological damage.
Right.
That of all these things cost money. And we should at some point also, people in the diaspora should get the money from the how do you call it, from the West.
Yeah,
In
partners.
the belly of the beast, you have to get this money, bring it back, and help restore, like I said, the knowledge system, health system, restore a lot of the psychological damage, etc. Because the propaganda is so strong that if you cannot do enough for the material condition of the people,
right,
everybody will join the Western Eurocentric ideological systems. So
thank you very much, Kenneth, Ruben, Joyce, Barbara, and the other lady, right? Lisbeth. It's been a great meeting. I've really enjoyed the sessions we've had. It's been a learning experience for myself, and I hope you've also been able to pick some few things from me. I hope that we have the opportunity to continue the dialogue, the discussion, and to see how we can, in our own small way, leverage to brighten our own small corners, and see that one day, when you have opportunities to lead your respective institutions and also your countries, you plow back profit to the homeland so that we can all build Africa and build Africa in the diaspora and to become a great people once again. Thank you very much. On that note, I will draw the curtain to a close for now. Thank you. Right.
Thank you. A good evening. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.